The old mountain trails had witnessed countless stories of survival, but none quite like this one. On a chilly autumn afternoon, a hungry widow stood at the edge of a dusty frontier town with nothing left but the torn green dress she wore and the courage to keep walking. Every door she knocked on had been closed. Every face she met had turned away. Then one quiet mountain man looked at her with gentle eyes and asked only 4 simple words, "Can you cook?" She thought he was mocking her hunger, but what happened after that question would change both of their lives forever. Stay with me until the very end, because this unforgettable Wild West love story proves that the smallest act of kindness can become the greatest blessing. And if stories of hope, compassion, and heartfelt romance touch your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another inspiring frontier tale. Autumn had painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson as Elias Carter guided his old mule along the winding road into Cedar Creek. At 42 years old, the mountain man had become a familiar sight in the frontier settlement. His faded brown coat had been patched more times than anyone could count. His weathered hat had survived a dozen harsh winters, and his calloused hands carried the marks of years spent chopping timber, trapping game, and repairing lonely cabins hidden among the pines. People respected him, though few truly knew him. He rarely lingered in town after selling furs or buying flour. He preferred the silence of the mountains to the endless gossip that echoed through the saloon and general store. To many, Elias looked like a poor man with little to offer beyond hard work. They never realized he possessed something far richer than gold, a heart that refused to harden no matter how difficult life became. After loading sacks of flour, coffee beans, salt, and a few simple supplies onto his mule, Elias noticed a young woman standing beside the hitching post near the general store. Her green dress was torn at the sleeves and hem, her dark hair hung loosely across her tired face, and her hands trembled from hunger. She wasn't begging. She simply watched people pass by with quiet dignity, as if she hoped someone might see her without forcing her to ask for pity. Most townsfolk avoided meeting her eyes. Some whispered that strangers often brought trouble. Others insisted they had barely enough to feed their own families. Elias walked toward the watering trough and pretended to check his mule's saddle while studying the woman from the corner of his eye. She looked exhausted enough to collapse, yet pride still held her shoulders straight. A bakery owner stepped outside carrying a basket of warm bread. For a brief moment, hope flickered across the woman's face, but the man brushed past her without slowing down. Another rancher laughed with friends while carrying smoked meat wrapped in cloth. None of them offered so much as a crust of bread. The mountain man reached into his pocket and counted his remaining coins. After buying winter supplies, he had barely enough left for himself until trapping season began again. Still, something inside him refused to leave. He approached quietly so he wouldn't frighten her. "You look like you've walked a long way," he said gently. She hesitated before answering. 3 days. "And eaten?" She forced a weak smile. "I don't rightly remember." Elias glanced toward the general store, then back at her. "I can't promise fancy meals." She lowered her eyes, expecting another apology or excuse. Instead, he asked, "Can you cook?" But she blinked in confusion. "What? Can you cook?" he repeated with the faintest smile. She nodded uncertainly. "My mother taught me." "Can you bake brailes?" "Or stew?" "Every kind?" He tipped his hat. "Then I reckon I've been needing a cook." The woman stared at him, unable to understand. "I don't have money," she whispered. "I'm not asking for money. I can't repay you. I'm not giving charity." Her eyes filled with tears. "Then, why?" Elias shrugged as though the answer were the simplest thing in the world. "My cabin gets mighty lonely. The cooking's terrible. The place could use another pair of hands. Honest work deserves honest meals." For several long seconds neither of them spoke. The sounds of wagons rolling across the dusty street faded into the distance. The widow looked around at the people who had ignored her all afternoon before looking back at the quiet mountain man whose face held neither pride nor pity. "My name is Clara," she whispered. "Elias." She swallowed hard. "If I come, I'll earn every bite. I'd expect nothing less. As they prepared to leave town together, whispers spread across the boardwalk. That mountain fellow's bringing home a stranger. He'll regret it. She's probably looking for an easy life. Neither Elias nor Clara answered the gossip. He simply lifted one of her worn bundles onto the mule, while she climbed carefully beside the supplies. Before they left, Elias bought one fresh loaf of bread with his final coins and handed it to her. She hesitated. "You should eat first, so should you." He smiled. "We'll share." For the first time in many months, Clara smiled back. As the sun slipped behind the towering mountains, they traveled toward the lonely cabin deep in the pines. Neither of them realized that the simple question asked that afternoon would soon transform a silent house into the warmest home either had ever known, and that before winter's first snowfall, two lonely hearts would begin discovering that love often starts not with grand promises, but with shared bread, honest work, and quiet acts of kindness. The mountain cabin that had once echoed with silence slowly filled with the comforting sounds of everyday life. Before sunrise each morning, Clara swept the wooden floors, baked fresh bread, and stirred hearty stew over the crackling fire while Elias split firewood outside and repaired fences before the first snow arrived. Neither spoke much, yet every shared meal and every quiet evening by the fire built a bond stronger than words. Clara insisted on earning everything she received, refusing to let kindness become charity. Elias admired her determination, while she quietly noticed how he always carried the heaviest load, gave her the warmest blanket, and never once reminded her that she had arrived with nothing. As autumn faded, the little cabin became brighter than ever before. Fresh curtains hung over the windows, wildflowers decorated rough wooden shelves, and the smell of homemade bread greeted Elias each time he returned from the forest. Neighbors who had once mocked the arrangement began whispering in surprise that the lonely mountain man's cabin had become the warmest home on the frontier. One evening, after a long day's work, Elias found Clara sitting on the porch watching the golden sunset over the mountains. "You've changed this place," he said quietly. Clara smiled without looking away from the glowing sky. "No," she answered softly. "This place changed me." Elias sat beside her in comfortable silence as the wind carried the scent of pine through the valley. For the first time in years, he no longer dreaded returning home after a day's labor. The empty cabin had become a place filled with laughter, warm meals, and peaceful conversations. Though neither dared speak of love, both hearts had already begun to understand what the other meant. Then, just as winter's first storm rolled over the mountains, an unexpected visitor rode toward the cabin with news from Clara's past. News that threatened to take away the happiness they had quietly built together and force them to choose between fear and the future they secretly dreamed of. The first heavy snowfall covered the mountains in white as a well. Dressed ranch foreman arrived at Elias's cabin looking for Clara. He explained that the wealthy family she had once worked for had finally discovered where she was and wanted her to return, promising comfort, fine clothes, and a secure future. Clara listened quietly before looking around the humble cabin. Her eyes rested on the warm fire, the fresh bread cooling on the table, and the man who had never treated her like a burden. Elias lowered his head and spoke gently. "If that's the life you want, I'll hitch the wagon myself." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Do you truly think I stayed because I had nowhere else to go?" she asked. Elias remained silent. She stepped closer and smiled through her tears. "I stayed because this is the first place that ever felt like home." The foreman rode away alone while the snow continued to fall outside. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Elias removed his weathered hat and said, "Clara, I never had much to offer except this little cabin and an honest heart." She took his rough hands into hers and replied, "An honest heart is worth more than every mansion in the West." Months later, as spring melted the snow, the lonely mountain cabin had become the happiest home in the valley. Neighbors often gathered there for fresh bread, warm coffee, and friendly conversation. The house that had once been silent now echoed with laughter, music, and hope. The townsfolk who had once doubted Clara now called her the heart of the cabin, while everyone admired the quiet mountain man whose simple act of kindness had changed two lives forever. Together, Elias and Clara proved that love is never built on wealth or grand promises. It grows through shared work, quiet sacrifice, warm meals, and unwavering faith in one another. And every winter evening, when the fire glowed brightly against the cold mountain wind, they remembered that everything had begun with 4 simple words: "Can you cook?" If this heartwarming Wild West story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes that kindness can still change lives. Until our next frontier tale, may your heart always find its way home.